Today I want us to try and understand something. We've been reading Revelation. We've been reading, there we go. Got you that on. We've been studying Revelation. We've been studying a lot of stuff. We've been looking at symbols. We've been looking at events and things that happen and how really if we study the book of Revelation, we realize a lot of stuff that we don't understand in Revelation has been seen before the Bible. And it's the way that John is trying to describe what he sees that he really can't describe. So, one of the things that got me, last week we were talking about Mount Sinai. I mentioned Mount Sinai. It got me thinking, got me reading about it. And then I came across this scripture in Hebrews, and I thought, you know what? That is so true. So I want us to look at the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. The Old Testament connection that the nation of Israel had with God compared to the new connection, to the New Testament. Because that's really what Testament means. It's covenant. So it's the New Covenant. And the connection we have with God, and how they're the same, but they're very different. And just bear with me as we go through this. So the scripture that I'm going to read today is from Hebrews 12, and it begins at verse 18. It says, "You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and a storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word would be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrible that Moses said, 'I am trembling with fear.' But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the Spirit of righteousness, man made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkling blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." There is a lot in there. We're going to try and go through it, but I want us to start. We look at verse 1. It says, and I the heading at the top of my Bible says, "The mountain of fear and the mountain of joy." That's the heading that it gives for this. The mountain of fear. "You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken." We know the story of Israel. We know how things happen, right? It all starts with Jacob's family and the coat of many colors and the jealousy of the brothers, and they sell him into slavery, and he ends up in Egypt. And even though all of this happens to him, he is still faithful to God. He is faithful to who he is. And out of that, God raises him up till he's second only to Pharaoh himself. And there's this great plagues in the land. There's great drought in the land, and people are starving, and he brings his family in, and he's looking after his family, and then things kind of change, and leadership changes, and the next thing you know, well, there's too many Israelites. And so they're taken so they make them their slaves. And so they're captive. They're held captive by the nation of Egypt. And the story is God hears their cry. And so he sends Moses. And we know the story of Moses, how he was supposed to be killed by the midwife. But his mother covers this basket with tar and puts him in it and floats him down the river. And he's raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And he becomes this leader. And God leads the nation of Israel out of Egypt through a series of plagues and parts the Red Sea. And he gets them into the desert of Sinai. And he says, okay, now we're going to start something new. And he's made this covenant this agreement. And so there's a lot of scripture I'm going to read, but bear with me. And it might seem like a strange statement for Paul to make about this mountain, to start talking about something so scary sounding. But there's a direct tie and a direct connection to what he's trying to teach them. The word mountain is not used in the original Greek context. Okay? The original Greek text, story. But it's so obvious that the translators of the NIV put it in there. And I usually preach out of the ESV, but I wanted to use the NIV today because I think that word is important that we understand. Paul is talking about Mount Sinai. He's talking about that event where God came down and spoke to them, and basically he told them the rules. He laid it out for them. It was certainly not gentle. It was certainly not soft. But God revealed a little bit of his awesome power to the Israelites that day, and it terrified them. I watched a documentary a few years ago about some guys that were trying to retrace the steps of the Israelites out of Egypt, trying to figure out where they crossed the Red Sea, trying to find Mount Sinai. What they believe to be Mount Sinai is in Iraq, and it's heavily guarded. And they stuck through and they showed video of it. And the top of all the mountains there are the same color. And this one is the same color, except for the top of it. It's black, like it's been burnt. And it's an amazing story. I was going to try and find it, but I couldn't. But we pick this up in Exodus, right? This is all story of Exodus. And it starts in verse 1. It says, on the first day of the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, and they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did for you in Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully, and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. And so he does that, and then we pick it up in verse 10. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. Not person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. We go to verse 16, and it says, on the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of the Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, go down and warn the people, so that they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. So then, it sounds terrifying, doesn't it? A mountain shaking, thunder and lightning, like, it's terrifying. Then Moses, basically, God gives him the rules of the covenant. And God, this is this covenant that God made between Israel and himself. He gave the Ten Commandments. He told them how to deal with disputes within the people, how to make decisions about land, etc. To follow the law of the Sabbath. He told them the festivals they are to celebrate, the offerings they are to make, how to build the ark, how to build the tabernacle, everything about it. How the priests are to dress and how they are to be anointed. And Moses comes off the mountain and finds that they have made a golden calf, and things get ugly. While I have been off talking with God, you have followed your sinful nature and you build this golden calf, and people die. So God calls him back up on the mountain after things have been settled a little bit. And he gives new tablets with the 10 Commandments on it again. In Exodus 34, this is what happens. It says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken to the Lord. His face was actually shining. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, so Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterwards, all the Israelites came near to him, and he gave them all the commandments the Lord had given on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out, he told the Israelites what had been commanded. They saw that his face was radiant, and Moses put the veil back over his face until he would speak to the Lord again. So really, this is the way the common Israelite is introduced to God. Terrifying and held at a distance. Come here and no further. That is how they are introduced to God. And everything that happens through Moses, through Aaron, through the priests. And so Moses would speak to God and come back and tell them what they saw. They saw God as raw power. They saw God as the bringer of plagues, a parter of seas, the one who destroys the enemies, and the one who could call forth thunder and lightning anytime he wanted, and could literally burn the top off a mountain. That's how they understood God. One so powerful, if you got too close, you would die. And if he chose to speak to you, your face would glow because of his presence. That's the God they met, so that's the God they knew. And the weight of that would have been crushing. And the laws and the rules and the regulations that they were given, a lot of it was impossible. Now, God didn't leave them like that. He's a loving God, and he said, I'm going to make you a priesthood. And he's trying to shape them into what he needs. Not what he needs, but what he's going to use. And so he says, when you break a law, you do the sacrifice. There is a way to keep this relationship working. But it all seems to be a very distant thing. We pick it up in Hebrews in verse 20. It says, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. So this law, this fulfillment of the law, and this distance had to be maintained that nobody, not even an animal, could touch this mountain under the penalty of death. The command that nothing touch it indicates the holiness and the separatedness of the mountain. He also says you have to kill them by stoning or by arrows. Why? Because you're not allowed to touch anybody who touched the mountain, or you have to die too. That's how distant this thing is kept. And it's all very scary. And it's all very terrifying. The sight was so terrifying that Moses, in verse 22, the sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. So get this. Even Moses, the leader, the one who had led them out, the one who was specifically called by God, you come up here, he's terrified to go. So I'm just trying to get us this visual picture of how terrifying this is. There is a mountain that's covered with smoke. The ground is shaking. There is lightning. There is thunder. God says, if you get too close, you're going to die. Okay, come up here, Moses. Take some guts. Take some faith. Take some trust to actually to do this, right? No, and I think it's specific to understand, not just scared, but shaking and trembling. Because he had to go up and face God. That's their experience with God. That's the first time they really meet God. So now we look at us and our experience with God. And it's the same passage of Scripture. He just picks it up in verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion. They came to Mount Sinai. You have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. That's the new covenant. That's the New Testament. And it's interesting because he starts the sentence with but. But is a strong word that introduces a marked contrast between Sinai type experience that has befallen Christians. They have come to Mount Zion. This is one of the hills on which the city of Jerusalem was built. And it sometimes stands for that city. So they came here, but you came here. In Matthew 21:5, it describes it as, say to the daughter of Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, a foal of a donkey. That's Palm Sunday. And stands here, of course, for that city is the home of God's people, is also called the heavenly Jerusalem, and the city of the living God. And they use that several places in the New Testament. In Galatians it says, but the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. We see it again in Revelation 3:12. The one who is victorious, I will put a pillar in the temple of God. Never again will they leave. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. In Revelation 21, I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautiful, dressed for her husband. In Revelation 21:10, it says, and he carried them away in the Spirit to the mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. They came to a fearful assembly. We come to a joyful assembly. In verse 23 it says, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the Spirit of righteousness made perfect. And the reference here in coming to God really means to come into a relationship. I prayed this morning that we would come to know God. Not just come to know about God, but to really come to know Him. Not a distant, fearful thing, but a close, loving relationship. God is still the judge, but we are brought into the reason we are created, made righteous and perfect. It says, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, this is verse 24, and to the sprinkle of blood that speaks better word than the blood of Abel. You see, this new covenant It doesn't come through sinful, tainted blood of Abel, who killed his brother. His blood shut us out and kept us at a distance from God. It comes through the perfect cleansing of the blood of Christ, a pure blood that brings us into fellowship with God. Last week, I read the passage that I had read at the end of my message. I read it out of the Message translation. And I want to do that again, because it puts it in easier to understand terms. And its heading says, the unshakable kingdom. Unlike your ancestors, you didn't come to Mount Sinai. All that volcanic blaze and earth-shaking rumble to hear God speak. The ear-splitting words and the soul-shaking message terrifying them that they begged him to stop. When they heard the words, if an animal touches the mountain, it's as good as dead. They were afraid to move. Even Moses was terrified. No, that's not your experience at all. You've come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God. The invisible Jerusalem is populated by throngs of festive angels and Christian citizens. It is a city where God is judge, with judgments that make us just. You come to Jesus, who presents us with a new covenant, a fresh charter from God. He is the mediator of this covenant. The murder of Jesus, unlike Abel's, a homicide that cried out for vengeance, becomes a proclamation of grace. The Israelites came to God, to an understanding of God as come this close and no further. We came to God with Jesus saying, no, let me come to you. Please, let me come to you. They came to God in a way that said, if you get too close, you'll die. And Jesus comes to us and says, I'll die for you. Dale and Judy and Brenda and I went and saw a movie this weekend. And we saw the movie, I Can Only Imagine. And it's about the gentleman who wrote that song. And his experience. And terrible childhood. No, I know. But he says at one point, he was listening to songs by Amy Grant. And he said it was something that I could hold on to. And those words just jumped out at me. Probably because of my life. And I want to say to you, and especially to our young people, I know life is hard. I know that there are new challenges every day. And if you think you're going to get to 18 years old and there's no more challenges, that's a lie. The only time there's not going to be any challenges is when you're dead. Because there are new challenges all through life. But there is something that we can hold on to. And I know that we have a tendency when we're young to think, if I open the door and let him in, he's going to take away all my fun. Because when we open that door and we let him in, he fills our heart with joy that when these challenges come, we know, and I can't explain it to you. And if I could give it to you, I'd give it to you. But it's a peace that says, I'm not going to go through this alone. You know, when David wrote the 23rd Psalm, he said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now, I don't know of a scarier place. I don't know a scarier place than to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And David can say, I do not fear. And the world will look at that and say, well, you're crazy. How can you walk through the valley of the shadow of death and not be afraid? But David gives us the answer. He goes, because you are with me. And if you've really studied the 23rd Psalm, that's where David almost turns around. Because if you look at the 23rd Psalm, the beginning of it, he's teaching us. He's talking to the people, and he's saying, you know, my God does this, and my God does that, and He takes me here, and He does this for me, and He does that for me. And then he says, and even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and he turns to Christ, to God, and he says, because you are with me. He faces his God. No matter what the challenge is, I don't have to stay at a distance. You'll wrap your arms around me. That's our experience. That's my experience with God. And I can't describe it, and I can't tell you how it happened, but I was there. And I feel it every day. And there's new challenges. But Jesus is not saying stay away. He says, no, come, just open the door. Just open the door. And I challenge you. I challenge you to do that. Open the door and honestly let Him in your heart. Give Him 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
No, and people say that's great. Give Him 6 weeks and I promise you, you'll never go back. Honestly, give Jesus 6 weeks of your life. Where you get up every morning and you start your day in prayer and you read His Word and then you go about the day. Staying in connection with Him. Honestly trying to follow what He's telling your heart, and you'll never go back. I'm not saying life's going to be easy. I'm not saying you're going to get up the first morning and look at it and there's going to be a brand new car sitting in your driveway. But maybe that piece of junk you're driving will start. Because that's who He is. Because He cares about the little things. The little things that drive us crazy. He cares about cell phones. He cares about car keys. I lost my car keys that year. One time. A couple years ago. In the snow like that. And there was the keys to the church. There was keys to the safe to the church, and there was only one key. There was keys to our house, there was keys to my car. And I had other keys to the car, and I could get into the church. I can always get into the building. And don't ask why. And I finally went to prayer. One morning here, just a couple of us sitting around, I said, oh God, why don't you just find these keys? And so we prayed about it. And Bill Sylvester said, you lost your keys? I said, yeah. He said, where? I said, I have no idea. I didn't know where I lost them. Sunday school started, Bill walked outside, walked in the snow. Oh, just that. He cares about the little things. And He cares about the big things. You know, I did a funeral today. I did the funeral of the husband. I did the funeral, it was the husband of the woman I buried last month. And her husband died a month later. And that family, and I'm going, oh God, just wrap your arms around Him. Bring Him peace, and that's who He is. So I challenge you. Give Him 6 weeks. He's not a big, scary, untouchable God that's going to knock you down. He's a loving, caring Savior who's going to take care of you. Yes, it's possible. You're going to laugh. Dear Lord, I do pray for our connection with you, Lord. I pray that you would just break through these walls that we've built around ourselves, thinking we're protecting ourselves, but we're really hurting ourselves because we don't let you in. Help us to take down these walls. Help us to surrender tomorrow to you. Help us to understand what a gift we received at that cross. Be with us as we gather together as a family. As I said this morning, Lord, this is not about food. This is about fellowship. We don't do potlucks every month so everybody gets filled up. We do potluck every month so we can sit around as a family of God and have conversation and fellowship together. Amen. So bless that time and that food. In Christ's name. Amen. Amen.